In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And sometimes, in the chaos of that eternal conflict, something happens that defies even the Imperium's darkest nightmares. Imagine a weapon of legend, a walking tomb containing one of humanity's most sacred warriors, a grey knight entombed within a Dreadnought chassis. Now imagine that warrior has been sleeping for 5,000 years, locked in stasis, dreaming dreams that no mortal mind should endure. And then, in a single catastrophic moment of battlefield misfortune, that sacred relic falls into the worst possible hands, the greenskin menace known as the Orks. This is not a hypothetical scenario dreamed up by fearful imperial citizens. This is the kind of horror that keeps inquisitors awake at night, the kind of desecration that would prompt entire chapters to launch crusades of vengeance. Because when Orks capture imperial technology, they don't just use it, they corrupt it, modify it, and transform it into something that should not exist. And a Grey Knight's Dreadnought, that's not just technology. That's a living saint, a psyker of unmatched power, a warrior who has stood against daemons and emerged victorious, now trapped in a shell of blessed adamantium and ceramite. To understand the true horror of this situation, we need to understand what makes a Grey Knight's Dreadnought different from the standard space Marine Dreadnought. We need to comprehend the unique relationship Orks have with technology, how their psychic field warps reality itself. We need to grasp what 5,000 years of sleep does to the mind of even the most stalwart warrior. And then, we need to imagine what happens when these elements collide in the most catastrophic way possible. The story begins with understanding the nature of the Grey Knights themselves. These are not ordinary space marines. Every single Grey Knight is of Psyker, a wielder of psychic power drawn from the same source that fuels the daemons they hunt. They are the chamber militant of the Ordo Malleus, the daemon hunters of the Inquisition, and they represent humanity's finest defense against the predations of chaos. Their fortress monastery sits on Titan, Saturn's largest moon, hidden behind veils of secrecy, and psychic wards so powerful that most of the Imperium doesn't even know they exist. When a Grey Knight falls in battle, mortally wounded but not quite dead, the chapter faces a difficult decision. Unlike other Space Marine chapters, the Grey Knights do not view interment within a Dreadnought as a great honor. Most Grey Knights, when asked, would prefer to rest in the cool crypts beneath their fortress monastery on Titan, their service complete, their names engraved alongside their battle brothers for eternity. Death, for a Grey Knight, is not something to be feared. It is the natural end to a life spent in the Emperor's service, a release from the constant mental warfare required to resist chaos corruption. But sometimes, a Grey Knight's knowledge is too valuable to lose. Sometimes, their psychic power is too potent to let fade into death. Sometimes, the warrior himself requests to continue serving, unable to bear the thought of resting while his brothers continue the eternal war. In these rare cases, with the warrior's consent, the Grey Knights perform the sacred rite of interment. The broken body is placed within the armored sarcophagus, at the heart of a Dreadnought chassis, surrounded by reactive circuitry and blessed machinery that will keep them alive for centuries, perhaps millennia. A Grey Knight's Dreadnought is a marvel of technology that even the Adeptus Mechanicus struggles to replicate. The sarcophagus contains circuitry specifically designed to channel and amplify the pilot's psychic abilities. This allows the Dreadnought to project its Aegis field, the psychic barrier that protects Grey Knights from daemonic corruption, in a radius that encompasses nearby battle brothers. When multiple Grey Knights fight alongside their Dreadnought, their individual Aegis fields link together, creating a network of psychic wards far more powerful than the sum of their parts. This makes a Grey Knight's Dreadnought not just a weapon of war, but a force multiplier that can turn the tide of battles against daemonic incursions. The weapons mounted on a Grey Knight's Dreadnought are similarly sacred. Heavy psycannons, weapons that fire ammunition blessed by the chapter's purifiers and inscribed with prayers of banishment. Nemesis Doomglaives, massive force weapons that channel the pilot's psychic energy into blades capable of cleaving through reality itself. incinerators that burn with psychically enhanced flames, purifying fire that can reduce daemons to ash, even as it cleanses the taint of chaos from the very ground. Every component of a Grey Knight's Dreadnought is not just a machine part, but a relic, blessed and sanctified through rituals that take years to complete. But the technology, sacred as it is, pales in comparison to what lies within. The pilot of a Grey Knight's Dreadnought is not merely interred, they are transformed. Their remaining organic components, what little flesh and organs survived their mortal wounds, are suspended in amniotic fluid within the sarcophagus. This fluid is not the simple life, sustaining medium used in standard dreadnoughts. It is infused with rare chemicals harvested from Titan itself, mixed with psychically reactive compounds that help maintain the pilot's connection to the warp while simultaneously protecting them from its corruption. The pilot's mind is linked to the dreadnought through a neural interface so intricate that it takes teams of tech marines and librarians working together to properly install and maintain. This interface doesn't just allow the pilot to control the dreadnought's movements and weapons. It creates a symbiosis between warrior and machine, a melding of flesh and steel that allows the Grey Knight to perceive the world through the dreadnought's sensors while maintaining their psychic awareness. They can sense warp entities through walls of solid rock. They can detect the taint of chaos in individuals who appear outwardly pure. They can project their psychic power with a precision and strength that even their living brothers struggle to match. Now, imagine this magnificent, sacred warrior machine. This pinnacle of imperial technology and psychic mastery has been placed in stasis sleep for 5,000 years. 5 millennia is an incomprehensible span of time. Entire civilizations rise and fall in less. The Imperium itself has barely endured for 10,000 years since the Emperor was enthroned on the Golden Throne. For a conscious being, even a space marine, 5,000 years would mean watching everyone they ever knew turn to dust, seeing their chapter evolve beyond recognition, witnessing the galaxy change in ways they could never have imagined. But in stasis, time works differently. The Grey Knight within doesn't experience those 5,000 years as a continuous stream of consciousness. Instead, they exist in a state between life and death, between waking and sleeping. Some dreadnought pilots report experiencing visions during stasis, dreams that feel more real than waking life. Others describe a void, an absence so complete that when they awaken, they aren't certain they ever existed at all. The mental strain of this existence is profound. Even Grey Knights, with their psychic training and mental fortitude, are not immune to the slow erosion of personality and memory that comes with centuries of stasis sleep. The Grey Knight in our scenario has been sleeping for 5,000 years. When they were first interred, the galaxy was different. The threats they fought, the brothers they served beside, the very enemies they faced, all of these have changed beyond recognition. During their sleep, entire wars have been fought and won. New chapters have been founded. Ancient enemies have risen and been vanquished. The Great Rift has torn the galaxy in half, ushering in the era of the Dark Imperium. But the sleeping warrior knows none of this. They dream in the darkness, their consciousness suspended in amber, waiting for the call that will summon them back to war. And then, disaster strikes. The exact circumstances don't matter as much as the result. Perhaps the Grey Knights deployed to halt a demonic incursion, only to have an Orc Y appear mid-battle, turning a calculated strike into chaotic three-way carnage. Perhaps a Grey Knight strike force was ambushed while transporting sacred relics to a new fortress monastery, their ship crippled and forced to crash land on an Orc-held world. Perhaps a space hulk drifted through Orc territory, its cargo holds containing ancient dreadnoughts in stasis, and the Orcs tore it apart searching for loot. Whatever the cause, the result is the same. The stasis field maintaining the Grey Knight's dreadnought fails. The sacred machine, still powered down, still sealed, still containing its sleeping occupant, falls into Orc hands. And this is where our nightmare truly begins. To understand what happens next, we need to shift our perspective and examine the Orcs themselves. The greenskins are, in many ways, the most alien of all the xeno species that plague the Imperium. They are not driven by logic or reason as humans understand it. They do not build empires for resources or conquer territory for strategic advantage. They fight because fighting is what they are genetically programmed to do, what brings them joy, what gives their existence meaning. Orks are a biologically engineered species, created millions of years ago by the ancient Old Ones during the war in heaven. These precursor beings, locked in apocalyptic struggle against the Necrons and their star gods, needed soldiers. Not soldiers like the elegant Eldari, who required training and nurturing, but something crude, something that could be deployed in vast numbers and would never stop fighting no matter how desperate the situation became. So the Old Ones created the Krork, the ancient ancestors of modern Orks, and hardwired into their very DNA everything they would need to be the perfect warrior race. This genetic engineering manifests in ways that seem almost impossible to observers from other species. Ork technology functions despite having no right to work. Their weapons are literally held together with scrap metal, wire, and the orcish equivalent of faith. Their vehicles should collapse under their own weight. Their flyers should plummet from the sky. Their guns should explode in their wielders' faces. But they don't. Or rather they do, but less often than physics would demand. This apparent miracle has a source: the Warg field, a gestalt psychic effect generated by all Orks collectively. Every greenskin contributes to this field, and the more Orks gather in one place, the stronger it becomes. This field doesn't just enhance Ork technology, it warps reality itself, making things work simply because the Orks believe they should work. If an Ork believes a shoddily constructed weapon will fire, the Warg field makes it fire. If an Ork paints their vehicle red, because red is the fastest color, the Warg field makes it faster. This isn't unlimited reality manipulation, but it's close enough to make Imperial scholars question the nature of existence itself. The Orks who maintain and create this impossible technology are called mech boys, or simply mechs. They are odd boys, Orks who have developed specialist knowledge encoded in their genetics. A mech boy doesn't learn engineering through study or apprenticeship. They simply know on an instinctual level how to build machines. They understand mechanical principles the way humans understand how to breathe. They can look at a pile of scrap and see, not garbage, but the components of a functioning weapon or vehicle. But this knowledge comes with limitations. A mech boy can't just imagine any machine and will it into existence. They need a conceptual framework, an idea of what they're building. If they want to make a gun that shoots bullets, they need to assemble something that looks roughly like a gun. The Warg field fills in the gaps, makes the impossible tolerances work, keeps the shoddily welded components from flying apart. But there needs to be something there for the field to work with. This is why Orks are so fond of looting. When they capture Imperial vehicles, they're getting something that already works according to proper physical laws. All they need to do is improve it by Ork standards, which usually means adding more weapons, more armor, and painting it red for extra speed. The Death Skulls tribe has elevated looting to an art form. They're known for scavenging entire battlefields, stripping every usable component from wrecked vehicles and fallen enemies. They can loot a damaged lemon rust tank, repair it with whatever scrap they have on hand, paint it blue for luck, and have it back in service by the end of the same battle. The Blood Axes, another Ork tribe, are even more audacious. They actually study human tactics and use captured Imperial equipment as is when it suits their purposes. This makes them somewhat suspect among other Orks, who view this as un-Orky behavior, but it also makes them devastatingly effective. A Blood Axe's warband using captured Chimera transports can infiltrate Imperial positions with terrifying ease, because who expects the transport rolling up to the checkpoint to be full of greenskins? When Orks capture advanced technology, their mech boys experience something close to religious ecstasy. They see all that functional machinery, all those components that actually work according to consistent principles, and their genetically encoded engineering instincts start firing off ideas. What if we added more Daka here? What if we replaced this boring las cannon with a custom mega blaster? What if we welded spikes all over it and added a ramming blade to the front? The possibilities excite them in ways that would seem bizarre to human engineers, but make perfect sense in the context of Orc culture. Now imagine what happens when these mech boys encounter a Grey Knight's Dreadnought. Not just any Dreadnought, but one that's been sealed in stasis for 5,000 years. One that radiates psychic energy even while dormant. One covered in inscriptions and wards that hurt to look at. Symbols that seem to writhe and shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. One that, to Orc senses, screams of power and mystery and challenge. The initial discovery likely happens during a looting operation. A mob of Orcs, probably death skulls given their expertise in scavenging, are picking through the wreckage of a battlefield or the hold of a crashed ship. Most of what they find is standard fare broken lasguns, crushed armor plating, maybe a damaged tank that can be beaten back into service. But then they find it. A massive sarcophagus of blessed silver and ceramite, covered in seals and inscriptions, humming with residual power even though all its systems are offline. The Orcs recognize it as something important. They've fought space marines before, seen dreadnoughts on the battlefield, but this one is different. The silver, grey armor, the sacred symbols, the psychic residue that makes even the least sensitive Orc feel itchy and aggressive, all of it marks this as special. The mech boy in charge of the looting operation takes one look at it and makes a decision. This isn't just loot. This is a prize. This is something that will make them rich in teeth and respected among their peers. Getting the Dreadnought back to their camp is no small feat. Even powered down, a Dreadnought chassis masses several tons. The Orcs rig up a crude transport, probably involving a lot of chains, a salvaged truck bed, and several unfortunate Gretchen who get crushed during the loading process. But Orcs are nothing if not persistent. They haul their prize back to their settlement, probably stopping several times along the way to fight off other Orcs who want to claim it for themselves. By the time they finally get it to the mech boy's workshop, half the warband has heard about the amazing Humecan they found, and a crowd has gathered to watch. The mech boy approaches the Dreadnought with the closest thing to reverence an Orc can feel. They circle it, examining the armored shell, the weapon mounts, the mysterious components they can't quite identify. They can see that it's a vehicle, or at least something that moves, but it's unlike anything they've encountered before. The proportions are all wrong for a normal tank. It's shaped vaguely like a humanoid, which makes no sense from an engineering perspective, but the Orcs don't care about that. What they care about is figuring out how to make it work. They start with the obvious approaches. They look for access panels, hatches, anything that might let them see inside. But the Dreadnought is sealed tight, its mechanisms locked by systems the Orcs don't understand and can't recognize. They try hitting it with wrenches. They try prying at the seams with crowbars. They try cutting through the armor with welding torches. Nothing works. The blessed ceramite resists their crude tools. And the few times they manage to scratch the surface, weird things happen. The inscriptions seem to glow faintly. The air around the damaged area shimmers like heat haze. Some Orcs swear they hear whispers in a language they don't understand. This frustrates the mech boy, but also excites them. If something is this hard to break into, it must be protecting something really good. They redouble their efforts, bringing in bigger tools, more Orcs to help. Even a few captured Prometheum cutters they looted from an Imperial mining operation. Days pass as they work, and the Dreadnought remains stubbornly sealed. During this time, something strange begins to happen. The Orcs working on the Dreadnought start reporting odd sensations. Headaches, which Orcs don't normally get. Strange dreams where they're fighting things they can't see. A persistent feeling of being watched by something that hates them with an intensity beyond mortal comprehension. The mech boy dismisses these complaints. Orcs are supposed to be tough. If some git can't handle a few weird feelings, that's their problem. But the mech boy notices other things they can't easily dismiss. Their tools keep breaking in unusual ways. Wrenches snap cleanly in half when they should bend. Welding torches flicker out for no reason. The Gretchen assistants keep disappearing, and when the orcs find them, they're hiding in corners, gibbering about silver nights and burning eyes. One particularly superstitious orc, an old boy who's survived more battles than he can count, takes one look at the Dreadnought and refuses to go near it. He says it's cursed, that it has bad spirits in it, that the mech boy should just chuck it off a cliff and forget about it. The mech boy, of course, ignores all of this. Superstition is for gits who don't understand the beauty of machines. They're close to a breakthrough, they can feel it. The power source, wherever it is, still has charge. They've managed to trace what they think are power conduits, though the routing makes no sense to their orc sensibilities. There's definitely something alive in there. They can feel vibrations that suggest biological activity. They just need to find the right way in. Eventually, after weeks of effort, they succeed. Not through careful engineering or sophisticated analysis, but through the application of enough brute force to overcome the Dreadnought's seals. They rig up a mechanical claw attached to a salvaged truck, chain it to one of the armor plates, and gun the engine. Metal screams. Servo motors that haven't engaged in 5,000 years suddenly activate, trying to maintain the seal. Ancient mechanisms, designed by master tech marines and blessed by chaplains, struggle against the raw mechanical power of orc engineering. And then, with a sound like a cathedral bell cracking, something gives way. The armor plate tears free, not neatly, but in a jagged ruin that destroys several delicate systems in the process. The orcs cheer, thinking they've won. The mech boy rushes forward to examine their prize, eager to see what wonders lie within. What they find is beyond their comprehension. The interior of a Dreadnought sarcophagus is a nightmare of biological and mechanical integration. Cables and tubes snake through what remains of a human body, feeding into flesh that barely qualifies as alive. Amniotic fluid, now exposed to air for the first time in millennia, begins to drain and evaporate. Monitoring systems, their connections severed by the forcible opening, start screaming warnings that no one present can understand. And at the center of it all, suspended in the fluid, is what's left of a grey night. The orcs stare at this revelation with expressions that, on more thoughtful faces, might be mistaken for horror. They've seen space marines before, killed plenty of them in battle. But this is different. This is a warrior reduced to component parts, kept alive through means that seem more like torture than medicine. They can see where limbs once were, now replaced by mechanical interfaces. They can see the mass of scarring where the marine's body was too damaged to function, but too valuable to let die. They can see the neural interface jacks, still plugged into the base of the skull, still feeding signals to, and from a brain that has been sleeping for 5,000 years. But orcs being orcs, the moment of philosophical contemplation doesn't last long. The mech boy quickly moves from shock to excitement. Look at all these components. The integration between meat and machine is unlike anything they've seen before. The power routing is sophisticated beyond belief. And there, deep within the chest cavity of what was once a warrior, is the heart of the whole system, a power core that still pulses with energy, feeding life into dead flesh and dormant machinery. The mech boy starts barking orders. They need to extract this whole assembly without damaging it further. They need to study how it works, figure out how to replicate it, or at least how to use it. The fact that there's a potentially living space marine involved doesn't really register as a concern. To the orc way of thinking, if the Humi is asleep, then they're just another component of the machine. No different from a servitor or a cogitator, just more complicated. They begin the extraction process with all the delicacy that orcs can muster, which is to say, very little. They use hooks and chains to pull systems free. They cut cables they don't understand the purpose of. They drain fluids they don't realize are essential for maintaining the marine's suspended state. Throughout all of this, warning indicators flash, alarms sound, and systems start cascading into failure. But the orcs don't know what any of these warnings mean, so they ignore them. And here's where the WAHH field begins to have its insidious effect. Remember, the gestalt psychic force generated by Orks warps reality to match their beliefs. When a mechboy is working on a machine, especially a machine they're excited about, the WAHH field intensifies around them. It starts making things work the way the mechboy expects them to work, regardless of how they're supposed to work. The problem is, the Grey Knight's Dreadnought isn't supposed to work by Ork logic. It's built on principles of sacred geometry, psycho, reactive circuitry, and blessed machinery. The power flows through circuits inscribed with prayers. The neural interfaces are attuned to psychic frequencies. The life support systems maintain not just biological function but spiritual integrity, protecting the marine soul from corruption while keeping their psychic powers from overwhelming their mortal shell. When the WAGH field starts interacting with these systems, the results are unpredictable and horrifying. Components that shouldn't be compatible start forming strange connections. Power flows in ways that make no physical sense. The amniotic fluid, now mixed with Ork motor oil and whatever other fluids the mechboy thought might work, takes on properties it shouldn't possess. The entire system begins to shift, warping under the influence of the Ork psychic field, becoming something that exists in the uncomfortable space between Imperial technology and Ork engineering. This corruption spreads slowly but inexorably. The blessed silver armor, inscribed with wards against chaos, starts to tarnish in weird patterns. The prayers and hymns etched into every surface begin to blur, their sacred geometry distorting as the WAHH field imposes Ork reality onto Imperial construction. The machine spirit, that fragment of divine essence that inhabits all Imperial technology, finds itself drowning in a sea of Ork belief, struggling to maintain its nature while being pulled toward something completely alien. And deep within the failing systems, something begins to stir. The Grey Knight, sealed in stasis for 5,000 years, starts to wake. Not naturally, not gently as their brothers would have woken them with sacred rituals and careful system restarts. No, they wake in agony as their life support fails, as their neural interfaces short out and reconnect in wrong configurations, as the psychic wards that protected their mind begin to unravel. The awakening is traumatic beyond description. Imagine sleeping for 5 millennia. Your last memory, the decision to enter stasis, the quiet darkness of shutdown, and then you wake to pain. Your body, what little remains of it, is screaming. Every nerve ending is on fire. Systems you've forgotten you have are malfunctioning, sending contradictory signals to your brain. Your psychic senses, dormant for so long, suddenly snap back to full awareness, and the first thing they detect is the presence of dozens of greenskin xenos, their primitive psychic signatures pressing against your consciousness like a vice. The Grey Knight's eyes open, or rather, their optical sensors activate. What they see makes no sense. They're not in the sacred halls of Titan. They're not on a battlefield surrounded by their brothers. They're in some kind of crude workshop, surrounded by Orks who are pulling their sacred chassis apart, like children dismantling a toy. Tubes and cables dangle from their exposed sarcophagus. They can feel the violations. Every cut wire a severed nerve, every breached seal a wound. They try to access their systems, to activate their weapons, to call for help. Nothing responds correctly. The neural interfaces are damaged, their connections scrambled. When they try to move their assault cannon, they feel the servos engage, but the weapon doesn't traverse. It's not even attached anymore. The Orks removed it hours ago. Their psychic abilities, usually channeled through carefully constructed focusing arrays, now have nowhere to go. The psycho, reactive circuitry that would normally guide and amplify their powers is shorted out, sparking, malfunctioning. But a Grey Knight is not defenseless, even in this state. They are a psyker of immense power, trained from childhood to master the energies of the warp. And right now, they are very, very angry. The psychic backlash, when it comes, is like a thunderclap in the warp. Every Ork in the workshop suddenly feels like their brain is being squeezed by an invisible hand. The mechboy, standing closest to the awakened Grey Knight, bears the full brunt of it. They see visions of daemons being banished, of chaos champions reduced to ash, of battles fought across millennia. They see what this warrior has done, the horrors they've faced, the enemies they've destroyed. And they realize, perhaps for the first time in their life, what true fear feels like. The orcs scatter, screaming in their crude language, grabbing whatever weapons they can find. The Gretchen flee outright, knowing that when things start exploding, being nearby means death. The mech boy tries to grab tools, to fight back, to do something. But their hands won't work properly. They're shaking, a physical response to psychic assault that orcs aren't supposed to experience. The Grey Knight, trapped in their broken shell, tries to fight. They gather their psychic power, pulling energy from the warp despite the pain, despite the malfunctioning systems, despite everything. They channel it outward, not in a focused attack. They don't have the control for that anymore, but in a raw explosion of psychic force. The air around the Dreadnought ignites with spiritual fire. Orcs caught in the blast are thrown back, their crude nervous systems overwhelmed by energies they have no defense against. But the Grey Knight is dying. They can feel it. Their life support is gone. Their body, such as it was, is failing. The amniotic fluid that kept them alive is drained away. The machines that sustained their ruined organs are offline. They have minutes, maybe, before the biological components that remain can no longer sustain consciousness. In those final moments, as their vision fades and their psychic powers flicker like a candle in the wind, the Grey Knight makes a choice. They've been a weapon of the Emperor for longer than they can remember. They've fought daemons and heretics. They've walked into the warp itself and emerged victorious. They've endured 5,000 years of stasis, sleeping the centuries away while the galaxy burned. And now, they're going to die in an orc scrapyard, torn apart by Xenos who don't even understand what they've destroyed. They could let go. Let the darkness take them, accept the death they've been denied for so long. But that would mean leaving their sacred chassis intact, leaving their psychically attuned components available for orc experimentation and corruption. That would mean failing in their duty one final time. So instead, they do what Grey Knights do best. They weaponize their death. They pull every last scrap of psychic energy they can muster, drawing not just from their own soul, but from the warp itself. They channel it not outward in an attack, but inward, into their power core, into the blessed machinery that has kept them alive for so long. They overload it deliberately, forcing it past every safety limit, every threshold that should cause automatic shutdown. The power core, designed to run for centuries with careful maintenance, is suddenly being pushed to output energy at levels that would power an entire strike cruiser. The blessed machinery resists, trying to shut down, trying to protect itself. But the Grey Knight overrides every safeguard, commands every system to run at maximum, forces the very machine spirit to comply with their final order. The mech boy, recovering from the psychic blast, sees what's happening. They recognize the signs, the building energy, the catastrophic overload. They try to run, screaming at the other orcs to get clear. Some listen, some don't, it doesn't matter. The explosion, when it comes, is both physical and psychic. The power core detonates with the force of a demolition charge, sending shrapnel in all directions, destroying what remains of the Dreadnought chassis and everything within a dozen meters. But worse than the physical damage is the psychic shockwave. The Grey Knight's death releases their accumulated psychic power in a burst of purifying energy. It's not controlled, not directed, just raw psychic force channeled through 5,000 years of hatred for the enemies of mankind. Orcs across the camp feel it. Those with even rudimentary psychic sensitivity, like the Weird Boys, feel their heads exploding from the pressure. The WHH field itself recoils, disrupted by energies it cannot assimilate or corrupt. For a brief moment, Orc technology throughout the settlement stops, working as the Gestalt psychic field that sustains it is temporarily suppressed. In the workshop, where the Dreadnought stood moments before, there is now only a crater. The mech boy, if they were lucky, was vaporized instantly. If they were unlucky, they survived long enough to feel the psychic backlash burn through their mind, experiencing every moment of agony the Grey Knight endured during their interment. Other orcs lie scattered around the blast zone, some dead, some dying, some simply unconscious from psychic trauma. The sacred components, the psycho-reactive circuitry, the blessed armor, the holy weapons, all of it is destroyed beyond any hope of recovery. The Grey Knight made certain of that. In their final act, they ensured that nothing of their chassis could be corrupted, nothing could be salvaged, nothing could be turned into an orc parody of what they once were. But the story doesn't end with the explosion. It can't. Because a Grey Knight's Dreadnought isn't just lost equipment that can be written off and forgotten. It's a sacred relic. A brother of the chapter, a warrior who has stood against the forces of chaos for longer than some civilizations have existed. When one goes missing, the Grey Knights don't simply mark it as destroyed and move on. They investigate. They search. And if necessary, they wage war to recover what was lost. The psychic explosion serves as a beacon. Every psyker within light years feels it, a pulse of pure, righteous fury that cuts through the warp like a clarion call. The Grey Knights themselves, with their enhanced psychic sensitivity and their connection to their brothers, feel it most acutely. They know one of their own has died, and not in glorious battle, but in degradation and despair. The response is immediate and overwhelming. A Grey Knight strike force is dispatched to investigate, led by a librarian who can trace the psychic echoes back to their source. They arrive at the Orc settlement expecting to find a battlefield, evidence of a last stand. Perhaps the broken remains of their brother's chassis that they can recover and enter with honor. What they find instead is evidence of desecration. The crater where the Dreadnought exploded is scorched with psychic residue, the earth itself scarred by energies that will take decades to fade. Scattered around it are the bodies of Orks, their deaths violent and traumatic. And in the workshop nearby, they find the tools used to violate their brother's sanctity, the cutters that breached the seals, the chains used to tear armor plating free, the crude diagrams where the mechboy tried to understand systems they had no right to even look upon. The fury of the Grey Knights is terrible to behold. These are not warriors who give in to rage easily. They are trained from childhood to suppress emotion, to remain calm in the face of horrors that would drive normal humans mad. But this violation strikes at the very heart of what they are. This is not just an attack on the Imperium. This is personal. They hunt down every orc who was involved. The survivors who fled the initial explosion find themselves pursued by silver, armored warriors whose every strike is enhanced by psychic power. The orcs who tried to hide, thinking the danger had passed, are dragged from their hiding places and executed. Even the Gretchen who merely witnessed the desecration are put to death, their memories of what they saw deemed too dangerous to be allowed to spread. But the Grey Knights go further. They scour the entire settlement, using their psychic abilities to detect any trace of corruption. They find components the mechboy removed from the Dreadnought before the explosion, pieces of blessed armor kept as trophies, fragments of psycho, reactive circuitry that the Orcs were trying to study. All of it is recovered, all of it is purified through sacred rituals, and all of it is either destroyed or returned to Titan for proper interment. The workshop itself is reduced to ash. Every tool the mechboy used, every diagram they drew, every scrap of material that came into contact with the Dreadnought, all of it is burned. The Grey Knights call down orbital fire from their strike cruiser, reducing the entire area to molten slag. Even the earth itself, tainted by the presence of the sacred machinery in such profane hands, is sanctified through psychic ritual. And they don't stop there. The Grey Knights trace the Orc warband that captured the Dreadnought back to its source. They find the battlefield where their brother fell, or the hulk he was being transported on, or wherever the initial capture occurred. They investigate every detail, determine exactly how this catastrophe was allowed to happen. If there were failures in security protocols, those protocols are updated. If there were strategic errors that led to the Dreadnought being captured, those lessons are learned and taught to future generations. Then comes the hardest part, determining what to tell the chapter. A Grey Knight's Dreadnought doesn't just disappear without someone noticing. Their brothers knew they were being awakened or transported. Someone ordered their deployment. Someone was responsible for their security. The chapter must decide how to account for this loss, how to explain what happened, how to honor their fallen brother while acknowledging the horror of their final moments. The decision, when it's made, is to tell the truth. The Grey Knights don't believe in comforting lies. They tell their battle brothers that one of their own was captured by Orks, that he was defiled and violated, that in his final moments he chose to destroy himself rather than allow his sacred chassis to be corrupted. They tell this story not to inspire despair, but to remind every Grey Knight of the stakes of their eternal war, of what can happen when vigilance lapses, of why they can never, ever allow themselves to be captured alive. The name of the fallen warrior is inscribed in the chapter's crypts, alongside the countless other heroes who have given their lives in service to the Emperor. But his story is also entered into the chapter's tactical databases, studied by strategists and commanders, analyzed for lessons that might prevent similar catastrophes in the future. The Grey Knights are nothing if not pragmatic. Grief is permitted, but it must be channeled into action, into improvement, into ensuring that the sacrifice wasn't in vain. For the Orks, the incident becomes legend. The ones who survived spread the tale, each telling embellished and exaggerated until the truth is buried under layers of Ork bragging. They talk about the Sheeny Humi can that exploded and killed half the warband. They talk about the mech boy who tried to loot it and got himself blown to bits. They talk about the Silver Knights who came afterward, hunting down anyone who'd seen the thing, leaving nothing but corpses in their wake. Some Orks take this as a warning. They learn to recognize Grey Knight's iconography, to avoid anything that carries those particular symbols. They see silver armor and decide maybe this particular fight isn't worth it, but most Orks, they just see it as a challenge. One day they think, one day we'll loot one of those shiny cans and figure out how to use it. One day we'll be the ones wearing that fancy armor and shooting those special guns. One day we'll show those silver gits that Orks are the best at everything, even looting their sacred junk. This fundamental misunderstanding of what they're dealing with is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the entire situation. The Orks don't comprehend the gravity of what they did. They don't understand that they desecrated a living saint, violated a sacred warrior, committed a sin so profound that entire chapters would wage crusades to avenge it. To them, it was just another looting operation that went wrong. The Humican exploded, some boys died, and the silver gits came back for revenge. Just another day in the galaxy, just another scrap in the eternal fight. This philosophical disconnect highlights one of the core horrors of the Warhammer 40k universe. The Imperium sees itself as the rightful inheritors of the galaxy, protectors of humanity, defenders of civilization against the darkness. They view their sacred warriors, especially the Grey Knights, as holy crusaders doing the Emperor's work. The death of such a warrior in battle is tragic but meaningful, a sacrifice made in pursuit of humanity's survival. But to the Orks, humans are just another enemy, no more significant than the Elder or the Tau, or the countless other species they fight. The sacred nature of a Grey Knight's Dreadnought, the centuries of service, the psychic power, the holy purpose, none of it means anything to them. It's just another piece of loot, another shiny thing to grab and take apart and see if they can use it themselves. This fundamental inability to communicate across the philosophical divide between species is what makes Orks so dangerous. You can't reason with them. Can't make them understand why certain things are sacred. Can't expect them to show respect for concepts they don't even have words for. They exist in a state of perpetual warfare, seeing the entire galaxy as one big scrapyard full of things to loot and enemies to fight, and they're perfectly happy with that arrangement. The Grey Knight who died in that Ork workshop understood this. In those final moments, as they felt their body failing and their psychic powers flickering out, they understood that there would be no mercy, no understanding, no respect for what they had been or what they represented. The Orks would take them apart like a puzzle, examining each component with crude interest, trying to figure out how to make it Orky. They would deface everything sacred, corrupt everything blessed, turn a holy warrior into a profane parody. So they chose destruction, they chose oblivion, they chose to deny the Orks their prize, even if it meant destroying themselves in the process. In a way, it was the most Grey Knight thing they could have done. Faced with an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be converted, couldn't be saved, they took the only option that ensured victory: mutual annihilation. They died, but they took the mission with them. Ensured that the sacred technology couldn't be corrupted, protected the chapter's secrets even in death. This is the grim reality of serving the Imperium in the 41st millennium. Sometimes, victory looks like this. Sometimes, the best outcome you can hope for is to die in such a way that your enemies gain nothing from your death. Sometimes, duty demands not just that you give your life, but that you erase yourself so completely that it's as if you never existed at all. And the truly horrifying part: this scenario, as specific and unusual as it seems, is not unique. Similar incidents have happened throughout Imperial history, will continue to happen as long as the Imperium fights its wars. Dreadnoughts are captured by enemies, sacred relics fall into profane hands, holy warriors are forced to make terrible choices in their final moments. The galaxy is vast. The enemies are numerous, and not every story has a happy ending. The Imperium tries to prevent these scenarios. They have protocols for securing dreadnoughts, rituals for protecting sacred technology, contingencies for when things go wrong. But the galaxy is chaotic, war is unpredictable, and sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, disaster strikes anyway. All they can do is respond as best they can, learn from their failures, and hope that the next time will be different. For the Grey Knights specifically, this incident would lead to changes in how they transport and deploy their dreadnoughts. Perhaps they install more robust self-destruct mechanisms that activate automatically if the stasis field fails unexpectedly. Perhaps they assign dedicated guard details to any dreadnought being moved between locations. Perhaps they develop new psychic protocols that allow a dreadnought to send a distress signal even while in stasis. But no matter how many safeguards they put in place, the risk will never be zero. As long as Grey Knights dreadnoughts exist, as long as they're deployed to battlefields across the galaxy, there's always a chance that one will be captured, one will fall into enemy hands, one will face the same terrible choice that their brother faced in that Ork workshop. All they can do is prepare for that eventuality, honor those who make the ultimate sacrifice, and continue fighting the war that never ends. The legacy of that single Grey Knight, dead for 5,000 years before even awakening, destroyed in an Ork scrapyard far from the sacred halls of Titan, lives on in the lessons learned from their sacrifice. Future warriors study their final choice, understanding that sometimes the greatest victory is denying the enemy any benefit from your defeat. Future tech marines learn to build more robust self-destruct systems, ensuring that if a similar situation occurs, the destruction can be even more complete. Future strategists learn to account for scenarios that seem impossible, because in the grim darkness of the far future, nothing is truly impossible. And somewhere in the crypts beneath the Grey Knights' fortress monastery on Titan, a name is inscribed on stone alongside thousands of others. The name of a warrior who served for longer than most civilizations endure, who slept for 50 centuries, who woke only to die, and who in dying ensured that their final act was one of defiance rather than surrender. Their physical body is gone, destroyed so completely that not even ash remains. Their dreadnought chassis is reduced to atomic particles scattered across an Ork scrapyard. But their service, their sacrifice, their final choice, these are remembered. Because that's what the Grey Knights do. They remember. They honor their fallen. They learn from their sacrifices. And they continue the fight, knowing that one day, they too might face a similar choice, might find themselves in a situation where the only way to serve the Emperor is to cease existing. And when that day comes, they hope they have the strength to make the same choice their brother made, to destroy themselves rather than let the enemy win. This is the grim reality of being a dreadnought in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. You exist in a state between life and death, maintained by sacred machinery. Called upon only when the need is dire, you sleep for centuries, possibly millennia, dreaming dreams that may or may not be your own. And when you finally wake, it might be to the worst possible scenario, surrounded by enemies, your sacred chassis violated, your brothers nowhere in sight. In that moment, you must be ready to make the hardest choice of all, to destroy yourself completely, taking your enemies with you if possible, but more importantly, denying them the victory of corrupting what you were. The Orks, for their part, continue their eternal rampage across the galaxy, largely unaware of the larger implications of what happened. They've learned that some loot explodes if you mess with it wrong. They've learned that the silver gits take it really personally when you loot their stuff. But they haven't learned to stop trying, because that's not what Orks do. They loot because looting is fun. They fight because fighting is glorious. They modify captured technology because making things more orky is the purpose of existence itself. And so the cycle continues. Orks loot Imperial equipment. The Imperium responds with overwhelming force. Both sides suffer casualties that would be unthinkable to any sane civilization. And in the midst of it all, occasionally, rarely, a Dreadnought falls into the wrong hands, and a warrior who has served for centuries must make a choice that will define their final legacy. This is Warhammer 40k. This is the grim darkness of the far future. This is a galaxy where there are no good deaths, only different flavors of tragedy. Where the best you can hope for is to die in such a way that your death means something, that your sacrifice achieves something, that your enemies gain nothing from your passing. The Grey Knight in that Ork workshop achieved that. They denied the Orks their prize. They protected their chapter's secrets. They ensured that their 5,000 years of service ended with one final act of defiance. And that, in the end, is the only victory that matters in a galaxy that knows only war. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most horrifying scenarios in Warhammer 40k and lore, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We explore the darkest corners of the 41st millennium, the stories that don't make it into the glorious propaganda, the grim realities that lurk behind the Imperium's shining facade. There's always more horror to uncover, more tragedies to examine, more nightmare scenarios to contemplate. And we'll be here, bringing you the lore that keeps inquisitors awake at night. Thanks for watching, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.